Hello everyone and welcome to Starsector with me, JD Colley. This is the new player's guide to refitting today. So we're going to be talking about the refitting screen and all the stats on your ships that you're going to need to know to be able to make intelligent decisions about how to fit your ships. So first we need to find the ship information screen. This can be found three separate ways that I'm aware of. First is with fleet. This is probably the most common way you'll find it. But if you mouse over a ship, you will see all this information. The second way is in the refitting screen. And the third way is to press escape while on the world map, and you will see codex here. You can go through a whole bunch of stuff and find different things. I was looking at a Hammerhead class ship right here. That's my ship. And this lists all of the default stats for a Hammerhead with no bonuses or debuffs, known as D mods in this game. So I'm going to stay on the screen because the other two, the refit one, is a mouse over screen that I can't show you stuff, and same with this one. So I can't be looking at things and showing you. So I'm going to go back to this one. There's two other ways you can do it. You can also press I in combat while having a ship selected on the tactical screen, the one with all of the boxes and arrows and stuff. Or you can also press F1 in certain circumstances, such as, I believe, during combat or when you're looking at, say, the salvage screen. F1 will bring up a screen like this, except for the actual individual ship, not just the baseline like this one. So we're going to go over all of the things here, explain what this says and what it does. On the other screens, you will see a thing up right here that says design style, I believe. In this case, it would say midline. In the case of other ships, you'll have either low tech or high tech as well. Just to address a concern some people have had, or an idea, there is no progress of types in this game. Low tech is not bad, high tech is not good. They are just different. Low tech, midline, and high tech are different ways of approaching the same problem, that is, surviving combat while making sure the other guy doesn't. They have different approaches to it, and you will want to emphasize different things with each of those ship types. But it is not better to have a high-tech ship than it is to have a low-tech ship. So just to clear that up. All right, moving on. First here in our logistical data, we have CR per deployment. A normal ship with no bonuses from the player, from skills, or debuffs from having been deployed or flying through a warp storm or whatever, not warp storm, hyperspace storm, we have 70 default. It's called combat readiness, CR. Well, 70 combat readiness by default. That represents the amount of time your ship can spend in combat. Your ship, as we go here, see, has 360 seconds of peak performance at 70% combat readiness. Every time you deploy this ship, it will by default lose 12% of that combat readiness. This is subtracted after the battle, not during it, so deploying a ship will not cost any combat readiness immediately, but it will cost it as soon as you finish the battle. Every ship has a deployment cost. Some of them are much higher than this, some of them are lower. At any rate, it will dictate how much you have to spend to put a ship into combat, because that's right, you have to actually spend money to put ships into combat in the form of supplies. So when you put a ship into combat, even if the combat lasts 5 seconds and it's resolved successfully, you'll still lose 12% combat readiness. To recover that, it'll take 2 days and some change. See, 5%, so 5% per day, which adds up to 5%, or to, whatever. Anyway, you get the point. After 2 days and some change, you will have recovered fully back up to 70%. And it will cost you a total of 10 supplies to do that. So every time you deploy a hammerhead into battle, assuming that the hammerhead has no modifying statistics or attributes, it will cost you 10 supplies. Should that ship remain in battle longer than 6 minutes, those 360 seconds, it will cost you an increasing amount of supplies as that combat readiness begins to decrease, because combat readiness stays at peak at 70% for the entire duration of battle up until that peak performance time has been exhausted. Then the combat readiness will start to decline. At 50%, you will start to see a decrease in the soft statistics of the ship, such as speed, things like that. And at 25%, you start risking critical failures, such as weapons suddenly going offline temporarily, engines failing, things like that. At 0%, you risk catastrophic failures, where engines not just stop working, but explode, and hull starts breaking. All sorts of bad things happen. At 0%, you can very much destroy your ship just by staying in the battle, even if you're not under fire. So combat readiness is very important. There are some character skills that can raise the maximum level of combat readiness, both for the player and for the officers you can hire to man ships. This is not the crew we're talking about. We're talking about the actual characters you can have captain your ships. I'll discuss that in another video, but there are captains that you can send out called officers, and they can have their own skills, level up, etc., and their skills can also affect combat readiness. All right, moving on. Crew complement, pretty self-explanatory. You need to have 50 people in your inventory, in your crew and cargo, to be able to man this ship. If you don't have that, its combat readiness will decrease, representing how you don't have enough hands to keep everything running. Yeah, it's a bad thing. Make sure you have enough ship or people for your ships. You can lose crew in combat from taking hull damage, which is not armor damage, is taking hull damage. So make sure you have more people than you need. You can't see it right now, but let me exit out of this screen and go to the fleet screen. You can see here we have 350 people and we need 200 to fully crew our fleet. So I have 150 extra, so I can absorb some combat damage. You can lose people through fighting. Hull damage, you can lose them in fighters because your fighters are actually crewed unless they're specifically listed as drones. And they actually have a crew. Like if we go here, they have their own little screen, and you can see here, where is it? Crew per fighter. I can't mouse over it, but it says bomber, then ordnance points 18. Crew per fighter is 1. So every time one of these ships is killed, you will lose a crew, or I believe you have a 50% chance to lose that crew by default. And then there's some modifiers that can improve those chances. Anyway, going back to the codex screen for our hammerhead, we have maintenance. This is the number of supplies per month it will cost you to own this ship. Just for it to exist in your fleet, it will cost you 10 supplies per month. Now that is divided across the entirety of the month, and it is for each ship in your fleet put together, which for me adds up to be 1.1 per day. If we mouse over it, you can see a total here. More info. Let's see, there we go. So it's just the supply use from right now is just from ship maintenance. It's actually 1.07, but yes, that's the sum total of all my ship's maintenance costs divided across the month. So it's not much for my fleet right now. That number can go up quite a bit, especially when you start getting capital ships, which can have maintenance costs in the 40 to 50 range. Some of them even 60. They can get very expensive. Anyway, cargo capacity, very self-explanatory. It is how much stuff this ship can carry. Again, your cargo capacity for your fleet is the aggregate of all your ship's cargo capacity stats. That is also true for the maximum crew and the fuel capacity. If you exceed any one of these, let's go over here to our crew cargo. You can see here in the bottom left, you have these 3 bars. If you exceed any of these, you will incur a massive debuff to the number of supplies used. It's really bad. Like if you go 100 over or something, I've been as much as 1,000 over by accident in some cases, it'll increase your supply usage from 1.1 per day to 60 per day. It's bad. It's really bad. Do not go over on these stats unless absolutely necessary. It is almost always better to leave stuff behind than it is to take it with you and incur the penalty. So keep that in mind when you're looting. All right, back here again, we have our skeleton crew required. We've talked about that. That's the crew complement here. We have maximum burn. This is a very important statistic. So this determines how fast your ship moves on the overworld map, not in combat. That's this number over here. This is how fast your ship moves while on the map. And it's actually, your fleet moves at the speed of the slowest ship. So if you have 5 ships that have a maximum burn speed of 12 and 1 ship that has a maximum burn speed of 6, you will move at a speed of 6. So pay very close attention to this number because it will dictate how fast your fleet goes if it's slow. And how fast your fleet goes will affect who can catch up with you, who can't, who you can catch up with, who you can't, and basically determine whether or not you're able to dictate the tempo of combat on the map. You want to be able to outrun the scary fleets and catch up with the juicy ones. And having a slow burn speed will prevent you from doing that. There are stats in the technology character tree that will increase this minimally, so you can make up for it a little bit, and there's also some hull mods, which we'll talk about later, that can increase the burn speed. Augmented drive field is one of them. Moving on, we have the fuel per light year and jump cost. So this is how much fuel it will cost to travel 1 light year in the game on the world map. Again, how much it costs is a total of all of your fleet per light year. This number can get massive later in the game. Some ships require 10 fuel per light year, and you may have 25 of them, which means you can use up a lot of fuel really fast. You're going to need massive tankers with thousands of fuel to travel across the sector later in the game. The jump cost is how much it costs for you to move from inside a system to hyperspace. So every time you jump out, whether that be by a jump point or through a transverse jump, which is an ability you can get later through the skill tree, it'll cost you your jump cost of your fleet in fuel. It does not cost anything to move back into a sector, or sorry, I keep saying that, into a system from hyperspace. It never costs you anything. It doesn't matter if you use transverse jump or go through warp points or just fall in at a star. All of those things are free. So only moving out into hyperspace costs you fuel. Moving on, we have sensor profile. I talked about this a little in my last video, but your profile is how easy you are to detect. Your sensor strength is how good you are at detecting other people. So in general, you want this one to be small and this one to be big. Honestly, I haven't found either of them to be super important in most cases. If you're a smuggler, obviously you really want to focus on keeping your sensor profile small, and if you're an explorer, you really want to have your sensor strength high. But outside of those circumstances, they're not terribly important stats. For hull integrity, this is your hit points. If you run out of these, you die. Your ship explodes. Your character doesn't, but your ship does. So you want to make sure you have lots of these if possible. Armor rating. I'm not going to explain how armor works here. It's a really complicated subject, but suffice it to say, more armor is better. And as long as you still have armor on the side of your ship where you're being hit, you will not take hull damage. Armor is evened out throughout the ship, so all parts of your ship have armor, but you can get hit by a missile on the left side of your ship and start taking hull damage when being hit here, but not take hull damage if you're shot on this side because you still have armor here. So you can rotate your ship to face armor towards your opponent if they're starting to chew through on one side or another. Important thing for combat, but yes, armor's good. You want more. As a general note, low-tech ships tend to have a lot of armor. High-tech ships tend to have very little, and midline tend to be somewhere in between, as implied by the name. Moving on, we have defense front shield. So there are 2 types of shields. There are front shields and there are omni shields. Front shields are a fixed arc. As you can see here, the shield arc is 300 degrees. So in the case of the hammerhead, it covers from about here as in a circle all the way to there. Kind of a little jellyfish-shaped bubble. It starts at the front of the ship and extends outward in both directions evenly. An Omni shield, however, will face wherever your mouse is around the ship. So if my mouse is over here, the shield would start on this side and expand out that way. And if I move my mouse, the shield would face the mouse cursor. Omni shields require a bit more attention to use well, but they are very, very good at keeping you from getting ambushed and stuff because you can just move your shield to face whoever's trying to flank you. The downside is they tend to be a little less good either in terms of arc or upkeep, but it's not always true. Anyway, Omni shields are great. Front shields are also great. The shields in general are great. But if we look here, we have the stat that determines how great a shield is. It's flux damage per second. Flux per damage. So every time your shield takes a hit, 1 damage, let's say, it is multiplied by the number here. And then the number the result of that multiplication, the sum, no, not sum. Anyway, yes, I'm recording this very late. The result of that multiplication is added straight into your flux pool. So you want this number to be very small if possible. There are some high-tech ships with very powerful shields that will have numbers like 0.45, so they're halving the damage coming into them. Whereas some of the low-tech ships will have numbers 1.2 or higher, which means that they're actually multiplying the damage coming into them when they're taking hits on their shield. So keep that in mind. Some shields are really bad. Some shields are very good. On really bad shields, you want to use them to intercept damage that your armor just can't handle. Like if someone fires a Reaper torpedo at you, take it on the shield. Shields, they come back. Armor does not. However, if somebody's firing a weapon that does kinetic damage at you, like a needler, for example, you'll want to take that on the armor instead, unless your armor's gone. All right, moving on, we have flux capacity. And I'll explain why you'd want to do that with a needler in a minute. There's damage types in this game that have multipliers, and I'll explain what those are momentarily. So flux capacity, this is how much flux this ship can by default take before it overloads. Flux is increased by weapons fire, by active abilities, by having your shield up, and by taking damage. You can see here flux upkeep per second is 100, so every second you will generate 100 flux by having your shield on. Your dissipation by default is 250, so as long as you're not using abilities, firing your guns, or taking fire yourself, you won't ever generate flux. It won't be 0. Like if you go into battle before you engage anybody, turn on your shield and look at your flux. It'll be oscillating just a little bit between 0 and like 9, because this is not generated as a chunk, it's just a constant flow. So the dissipation is as well though, so it'll just kind of hover right above 0. What this means is that you're a non-zero flux. The game has something called a 0 flux boost. If you have no flux being generated whatsoever and you're not storing any in your ship as hard flux, you will be able to move 30% faster, I believe. I think it's 30%, which can allow a ship to move quite a bit faster than its normal top speed. So ships that are actually under fire and such tend to be much, much slower because they don't get that flux boost. So anyway, flux capacity, talked about that. This can be increased through capacitors and several hull mods. Flux dissipation is how fast, this is in per second, by the way, flux per second dissipation. This is how fast your ship gets rid of flux by itself if you're not venting. If your shields are off and you're not venting, this is how much it will just bleed into space naturally per second. So if you're not firing, not doing anything, you will get rid of all your flux eventually. And then the top speed is how fast you move. More is better. This is pretty average for a destroyer. Some ships are faster, some ships are slower. Obviously, most cruisers and battleships are going to be much slower than this. And we're going to talk about ordnance points in a bit. We're not going to cover that right now because that's more relevant on the following screens. All right, so the system Most ships have systems. We look at Harbinger, it's got a quantum disruptor. The Hermes has got maneuvering jets. The Harrier has targeting feed. Everything's got ship systems. It's what happens when you press F. In the case of the Hammerhead, it will provide a flux cost reduction to ballistic weapons and a brief boost to the rate of fire of all ballistic weapons. So all of your guns will fire slightly faster and will produce slightly less flux. It's basically a straight upgrade to your DPS in every way. It's a fantastic ability. But yeah, that's the Hammerhead's ability. There's another ship that has that. The Lasher as well has accelerated ammo feeder, and there might be others. But so these are not unique generally, but there's a lot of abilities. You'll want to learn these because some of them can really make a difference in combat. Don't worry about it. You'll pick it up as you go along. But if a ship does something you don't recognize, you'll probably want to look it up and see what its system is, because that's probably what just happened. Moving on, we have mounts. This tells you what kind of hardpoints there are. I will talk about those in a moment. And then it tells the armaments, because this is the Codex ship. It has no guns on it, obviously, so there's none listed and no hull mods. If we go to my ship here, you can see in those slots I have 2 railguns, 2 PD lasers, 2 Harpoon MRMs, and 2 heavy mortars. And then the hull mods have expanded missile racks, blast doors, integrated targeting unit, and compromised hull. And actually, if you look at my ship, you also see that there's some orange and green letters on some of the stats, like hull integrity and flux capacity and dissipation, and recovery cost. Those are bonuses and debuffs caused by various hull mods. So because my ship has compromised hull, its hull integrity is reduced by 800, and because of the additional flux vents and capacitors I've added to the ship, it has plus 200 capacity and dissipation. Also, because it has a compromised hull, the recovery cost is lower because broken ships are cheaper to recover. All right, now moving on to the refit screen.